Hello, everyone. My name is Will Cerny. I'm a second-year PhD student at Yale University, and today I'm going to be talking to you about summer research opportunities in astronomy and how to find them. So as a bit of an outline for what I'm going to talk about today, I'll start by discussing why you might be interested in pursuing a summer research opportunity in astronomy, what kind of benefits that can confer. Then I'll talk about what a typical program for summer research in astronomy looks like, focusing on programs in the United States. Then I'll talk about how to go about finding these opportunities. So what kind of keywords to look for, where to start your search, etc. And then lastly, I'm going to go into detail about the application process. So what are the required components, what's the timeline like, and some personal tips for us preparing a successful application to these programs. So to begin, why pursue a summer research opportunity in astronomy? And first and foremost, they're an ideal context to get your first exposure to scientific research. And so one thing I really want to emphasize throughout this video today is that these programs typically assume or require no prior research experience. These programs are designed to train you to become a better researcher. And for that reason, you really should not stop yourself from applying because you think you lack experience. Relatedly, these programs are a really great chance to start thinking about whether you can see yourself in a research career. You really do not need to have decided already whether you're more interested in a career in research or industry or something completely different. This can be a really great place to explore those interests in depth and decide whether it's something you like or not. Beyond that, these programs can be a really great way to develop practical skills. So for example, a lot of these programs emphasize developing your skills in coding or public speaking. And those kinds of skills can be transferable for both research careers and non-research careers. Back on the science side, these programs can be a really great chance to participate in exciting science that may not be offered at your home institution or may not be accessible during the academic year. So as I'll describe more in a minute, these programs typically involve traveling to a different institution and working throughout the summer full-time on an exciting area of scientific research. And that gives you a chance to see a new place, work with new people, explore new topics, all of which may not be offered in your immediate home environment. And then lastly, these programs can be a lot of fun. And one reason for that is that typically you'll be joined by friends with similar science interests from other institutions. So these are people you may not have met through any other means. So what does the typical program for summer research in astronomy look like? Well, typically they're 8 to 10 weeks long in the summer. They are on site usually, which means you'll go to either a research lab or a university or a NASA facility, for example, to do your research. And you might immediately ask, where will you live during that time? And the good news is typically these programs will either provide housing, for example, in a university dorm, or they'll subsidize it so that it's affordable for you throughout the summer. On a similar note, these opportunities are almost always paid opportunities, so you'll get paid for the work you're doing throughout the summer. They're just like a full-time job, and that can certainly make it easier to participate in them. And then on the science side, typically you'll work on a single project with a single research mentor. Sometimes you'll know in advance what kind of project you'll work on. Sometimes you'll specifically apply to work on a specific project, so you'll know exactly what you're working on in advance. But sometimes you have no idea before you get there, and it's lots of fun because you'll arrive, you'll be matched with the mentor, and you'll get pitched on an exciting science project to work on throughout the summer. Almost always, you'll be joined by a cohort of summer students, so that's a great chance to make friends and have a lot of fun on the side. And then lastly, there's usually a summative component at the end, so where you sort of compile all the work you've done throughout the summer into either a talk or a presentation, and or a research poster, which can be a great first opportunity to design one of those. Again, I want to add the caveat that I'm mostly focusing on US opportunities here. I have less experience to speak of opportunities outside the US, but I imagine they follow a roughly similar format. Okay, how to go about finding these opportunities? So before I answer that question in detail, I first want to introduce you to some terms to look for. This is really a non-exhaustive list, but I think it'll give you a great place to start. And so the real most important term to look for throughout your search is REU, or Research Experiences for Undergraduates. Formally speaking, this refers to programs funded by the National Science Foundation dedicated to giving summer research opportunities for students, college students. Colloquially, this term is often used to describe any summer research program, but know that it has a formal meaning with NSF-funded programs. Other terms you should be keeping your eye out for include SURF, SULI, and SSP. defined here. So SURF is a very general term for Summer Undergraduate Research Fellowship. Some universities, for example, have a program called a SURF. So Caltech, for example, has a program called Caltech SURF. SULI refers to the programs run by the Department of Energy, or one subset of those programs. Summer undergraduate laboratory internships. And then summer science program is another term that some institutions attach to their summer research experience for students. And again, this is a non-exhaustive list, but it's sort of terms to look out for that generally refer to programs for college students interested in starting doing research. So some examples of opportunities in more detail include the NSF REUs, as I mentioned, and I'll dig into these a little bit more in a second. But this link on screen will take you to a great spreadsheet with dozens and dozens of opportunities in astronomy. And this is the place I recommend that you start your search in because it just has so many of these programs in one single place. The Departments of Energy and NASA run their own internship systems, which you can find on the links given here. One question you might have is the Department of Energy, they do astronomy? And the answer is yes. Two of the national labs do have an important focus in astronomy, and some of the others have a smaller focus on astronomy in some form or another. And so these can be great places to pursue your interest in astronomy as well, even if it might not come to mind immediately. Beyond these programs, I also want to emphasize to look at your own college university's web pages. So while I'm mainly focusing on opportunities outside of your own home institution, working with faculty at your own college can be a really great opportunity as well. And that can often transition into longer term rules. So if you really enjoy the work you're doing, for example, you might be able to carry that over into the fall and spring following the summer. To add to that, I'd add that many universities offer some funding mechanisms. So again, that research can be paid either through the professor you're working for or a grant-based system. And so those are things to look out for. A great person to ask within your own department, for example, might be the director of undergraduate studies or analogous job. And they are usually the expert on sort of helping students find this kind of opportunity. So I wanted to show you the NSF REU list in more detail. So again, this is the National Science Foundation Research Experience for Undergraduate spreadsheet. And I'm just showing you a very small subset of that giant list that you can find on the link on the previous slide, where sort of on the far left, you can see the name of the opportunity. You'll see that some are at universities, some are at observatories. You'll find the locations of the opportunities. You'll find a point of contact should you have any additional questions about them, not given on the websites linked to the left. And then lastly, you'll see research and topics and keywords for each of these programs. So you'll see that some are less specific. So one just says astronomy and astrophysics, whereas a lot of them span a really wide area of topics that you might be interested in. So some have physics from condensed matter and medical physics to exoplanets, black holes, all this wonderful stuff. And so this will give you a little bit of an initial sense of what you might find at each of these sites. I would recommend immediately going to the website for the program you're interested in, seeing what they're offered in more detail. Sometimes they'll have a list of projects that you'll specifically be applying to work for across the summer. And again, sometimes that may not be the case, and you'll just end up working in one of these many awesome areas listed on screen right now. So be sure to check out this specific webpage. Highly recommend doing that first, and you'll find many, many interesting projects at many great places. Again, I want to emphasize everything I've shown so far is non-exhaustive. There are many more places to look for opportunities. Two other good places that compile lists of programs are the American Physical Society and American Astronomical Society, who both maintain a list of internships for the summer. Most of them, again, are for college students. And then lastly, there's a good independent maintained list that I'm putting on this slide, which you can feel free to go to, that may better represent international opportunities, which I'm focusing less on here. Okay, what does the typical application process look like? So you found a program you want to apply for. How does that work? The first thing to know is that typically the opportunities are posted in the fall or earlier for a winter deadline. A very common deadline for the programs, especially the NSF REU programs, is February 1st. So that's one to keep in mind, but be aware that some can be considerably earlier than that. So just start looking early. Typical application involves 4 main components: a short essay describing your background and your interest in applying to that specific program. Usually this is just 1 to 2 pages, sometimes even less than that. You'll typically need to attach a resume or CV where you describe your past experience. You'll provide an unofficial transcript talking about the courses you've enrolled in so far. You may not have many if you're a first semester college student applying, but don't worry, just submit what you have. And then lastly, these programs typically require 2 to 3 letters of a recommendation, which I'll talk about in a lot more detail in a minute. So you hit submit on your application. What can you expect from there? You'll receive your decision typically in March or April. Again, there can be pretty wide variance on when exactly this happens. Some are faster, some are slower, but typically March or April, especially if you have a February 1st deadline. And then lastly, should you get accepted, these programs typically begin in late May or early June. One thing to keep in mind is that sometimes that means these programs start before your semester ends. So if you're at a university that's on a quarter system, for example, like I was, some of these programs may start before your semester ends, and that can be problematic. So just be sure to look at what you're applying for. Sometimes they'll have an FAQ page saying whether they have flexibility on the start dates, which might allow you to work around these types of issues. But just keep that in mind when you're looking at opportunities. The FAQ pages for these applications are often really great at answering those types of questions. But if not, you can go to that person listed as a contact, for example, and email them and see whether there might be flexibility. To make everything I just said more concrete, here is a real picture of an application for one of the programs on the NSF REU list. So as you follow those links on that spreadsheet, most of the time you'll find that the programs have individual application forms that look a bit like this. They'll tell you about what they want to see in your essay. So for the one I'm showing on screen, they tell you to describe your backgrounds and interests, why you're interested in the specific program, how this opportunity might help your professional goals, and how other information you want to share might come to bear on your application. So hardships you've overcome, for example. Again, I want to emphasize that if you don't have lots of experience, that's okay. Just try to convey your passion and interests clearly. You'll need to attach a resume or CV for this specific application where you can describe in further detail other experience you might have had, any awards or honors you may have earned, et cetera, et cetera. And then lastly, you can attach a transcript. Here, unofficial transcript, maybe you'll get asked for an official transcript. Just know what your university system is in advance. And then lastly, you'll need to secure letters of recommendation. And the way these are submitted is sometimes varies from place to place. This one looks like you have your letter writers just go to a specific web page where they can upload the form. Sometimes you'll provide the email addresses of the people who are going to write them for you, and they'll submit them that way. Every application is different. Just follow the instructions the best you can, and everything I'm sure will be okay. Okay, how to go about asking for letters of recommendation. And this can be maybe the most scary and maybe most challenging part of putting together an application for these programs. So I want to give you a little bit of advice where I can. So the first thing I want to remind you of is that typically these programs require 2 to 3 letters of reference. And I want to start by saying like this can be hard for everyone, especially if you're an early college student in your first or second year. It certainly was for me, where I didn't have lots of letter writers that I thought I could ask. And it's hard for everyone, but the best people to ask would be your recent course professors, or if you have any, research mentors. These are generally people that can speak most to the experience that is most relevant to these opportunities. But again, sometimes this may not be possible. And in that case, you might want to consider asking employers, especially if they're in science adjacent fields, or if needed, even high school teachers. I think this is especially okay if you're younger in your college career, and these are people who may have already asked for a letter of reference to get into college, for example. And so if you're a first year or your second year student, I've seen my peers successfully apply to these programs. I've successfully applied to these programs using a high school teacher as a reference. Again, just do your best. You're not expected to have prior research in many cases. So just do your best in applying and hopefully it'll work out. Some personal advice for asking for a letter. I recommend asking via a polite email. Try to keep it concise, specifying what you're applying to, when the deadline is, and any other info that might be relevant to your application. I would recommend reminding them of why you're connected to them. So, if you're in a large lecture class, it might not immediately be obvious to them. So you might say, I was in your physics 101 class or whatever, just to remind them, and I'm sure that'll jog their memory. Sometimes it can be helpful to attach a resume or CV so that they know what kind of experience you have in applying, and sometimes they'll reference that in their letters. As a general tip, try to be as organized as possible. So if you're applying to multiple opportunities, which I would strongly recommend, try to maybe create a spreadsheet where you're listing the opportunities you're applying for, how they should submit the letter, and sort of the deadlines for submitting those letters. The people writing your letters may want that in different forms, but sort of that's a good suggestion for how to keep organized throughout the process. And then lastly, and probably most importantly, give advance notice. It takes time for a letter writer to write a good letter of recommendation. And so I strongly, strongly, strongly recommend giving at least 3 weeks of lead time before the application deadline. But more than that never hurts. You might want to give more than that, for example, if they've never written you a letter of recommendation for it, because then they'll have to write it completely from scratch. So again, 3 weeks or more, your specific letter writer might have a certain amount of time they request in advance. Just listen to what they say and try to aim for at least 3 weeks. Okay, lastly, I want to give some personal advice beyond everything I've said about how to prepare a successful application. As I sort of already alluded to, start seeking opportunities early. So if you're watching this as part of Intro2Astro 2023 in the summer, you're already doing great. You're already on track. Start looking at those places I mentioned before, and keep in mind that the deadlines can be as early as January. And you might say, oh, well, I can prepare an application the last week. Well, you can't because you need to ask for letters of recommendation. So again, if you want to give 3 weeks notice and the opportunity has a deadline in January, you really want to be asking at the very first week of December or earlier, especially since the holidays come in December. My next piece of advice is cast a really wide net. That means apply to multiple programs. You might want to apply to, say, 5 programs to improve your odds of getting into any one of them. I would also say cast a wide net in terms of what fields you apply to or what topics you apply to. You may now think you're interested in black holes, but maybe it turns out, for example, solar physics, it turns out to be another interest of yours. And so if you're even remotely interested in an area, I encourage applying. This is a great chance to explore a field that may not be at your home institution, as I said before. And then lastly, I really want to hit home, don't limit yourself due to perceived lack of experience. You're not only probably more experienced than you realize, but again, these programs are training programs. And so if you don't have an experience in a specific area or a specific set of methods, these programs will help train you and get you up to speed to do research in these fields. As for writing these essays and writing your CVs, the most important thing you can do are highlight your passion and highlight your experience if you have any. And when it comes to talking about experience, you should think broadly about what counts as experience. So jobs count as experience, internships count as experience, volunteer work can count as experience. Again, especially if these things relate to science, but they don't have to exclusively relate to science since many skills sort of cross between fields. Certainly relevant coursework can count as experience, especially if it's in an area closely related to what you're applying to do. And the one particular set of skills that may especially be good to mention are coding skills. And so if you've been following along with Intro2Astro 2023, coding experience has been built into the curriculum. And so you're going to come in with a lot of relevant experience. And it would be great to mention that experience when you're applying to these programs. And if you don't have these when you come to apply to these programs, that's okay. Oftentimes, there'll be an opportunity to learn some of them along the way. But if you have them, they can be great things to mention. And then on that final reminder, I want to emphasize that these programs are here to train you. And so passion, interest, and curiosity are more important than experience. The best thing you can do when writing that essay is to really convey you're really interested in learning, you have a passion for science, and you're curious to learn more about the universe. And that can make up for lack of experience. Just show your passion. Hopefully your letters of reference will convey that as well. So I know this has sort of been a rather brief overview, but we'd be happy to answer questions. Please feel free to reach out to us via Piazza, and we'll do our best to answer your questions. We'll also try to share these slides so that you can use the links that we've put within them. And yeah, best of luck in your search, and thank you for listening.